Hey everyone, Adam Shaw here from Bravura Media Company. I know I haven't uploaded a video in a very, very long time. I have an excuse. I recently moved to Boston. I moved to Boston back in November. We had the Christmas season. We went through the New Year. It's just been crazy. I apologize for not uploading a video sooner. I don't know if you can hear the traffic below, but we're in an upper level apartment. You can see the apartment in the background. I'll move a little bit. You can see a little bit. I love this apartment, but we've got traffic all the time. It's Boston traffic, so this is why I've got a microphone so you can hear me clearly. This was given to my brother during Christmas. Very nice of him. So hopefully my sound quality has improved on this channel for the upcoming videos. But I just want to say also that we're gonna do a video of celebrating our 1,000 subscriber mark. I moved and we didn't get to do that. We're now at 1,400 subscribers on the channel. Something special is happening. We're just growing at incredible rates. So I'm just, really humbled by everyone coming to the channel. It's growing. We're building something special. So I'm going to do another video later. Definitely check that out where we talk about our subscriber growth and how crazy it's gotten. But for today, we're going to actually look at this vintage map of Michigan. It is a railroad map, and it was originally produced in 1876. We're going to zoom in, kind of explore and examine this map. But before we do, let's kind of give a brief history into the aspects of the railroad systems in Michigan, and we'll kind of give a background to that. So to start, railroads really have been a vital part to Michigan's history, its population growth, and its trade. The state had a proximity to Ontario, Canada, and the railways assisted in the transportation of goods in an east to west route that included the eastern shore of Lake Michigan, Montreal, and the greater Quebec areas. The railroads in Michigan began really around the 1830 mark, 7 years before the area became an official state. And it's actually interesting if you look at, we'll talk about this later in the brief history, but if you look at the progression of the railroads, they really solidified the territory becoming a state because of the construction of the railways. We'll talk about that later. But the first railroads to develop in the area were the Pontiac and the Detroit railways. These railroads were the first charted railroads to develop in this section of the United States, in this northwestern section of the country. 2 years after the development of the Pontiac and Detroit railways, the state chartered another line called the Detroit to St. Joseph Railway that was meant to cross the lower peninsula and establish a connection with Lake Michigan. Obviously, you can see just based off a lot of this information, they really needed a transportation line to Lake Michigan and across, because I'm sure you could take goods on a railway nice and easy and then put them on a boat and then ship them across the lake. So the Detroit and St. Joseph Railway, that project fell through, for which a new railway was started about 1 year thereafter in 1833. This new railway was the Erie and Kalamazoo line, which was to connect Port Lawrence, which is now currently Toledo, Ohio, to some point on the Kalamazoo River, which flows into Lake Michigan. So again, they really centered on connecting parts of Michigan into Lake Michigan, and really doing that kind of poly transportation between boat and railroad. So they had this Erie and Kalamazoo line. 3 years after its initial charter, the railway was completed, and it consisted of a 32.8 mile stretch that extended from Port Lawrence, which is currently Toledo, Ohio, to Adrian, Michigan. initially they had horse-drawn cars pulling carts on this rail line. And then in early 1837, the first locomotive operated on the line and ran at an average speed of 10 miles per hour, so not really that fast. In 1837, the beginning network of railroads were developing in Michigan. In the 7-year stretch of railroad construction from 1830 to 1837, the Michigan Territorial Council agreed to terms with 23 individual railroad companies. So we just talked about a 7-year stretch. Remember when we talked about that earlier, about how Michigan was still a territory in 1830? Well, by 1837, they actually had kind of a basic network of railroads. And I'm very, very sure that that network contributed to the chartering of the state of Michigan. There's just no doubt in my mind that the transportation of goods and economics really was like, all right, we got to form this state. So essentially, Michigan was a state, and the Michigan Territorial Council agreed to these 23 individual railroad companies to really work and make even more lines. Out of this group of companies, the 23, only 5 actually worked on actual lines and only built around 61.1 miles of railway. The 2 main lines were what we mentioned before, the Detroit-Pontiac line and the Erie and Kalamazoo line. These railways were largely built with the intentions of economic interests for local businesses, but they were fundamentally looked down on by the government. The government realized that they needed to transport goods to many, many other places, and they were just really dissatisfied with their measly 2 railway lines with little subsections. They really wanted to blossom out, and this is why they hired the 23 companies to work on the railroads. They wanted to have as much construction as humanly possible in the quickest manner humanly possible. Based on their dissatisfaction with their current economic railroad reach, the government decided to build 3 additional railroad lines across the state that ran from the eastern part of the state to Lake Michigan. The eastern part of the state to Lake Michigan. The 3 lines to be constructed were the Northern Line, which was the St. Clair to Grand Haven line, the Central Line, which was Detroit to St. Joseph, and the Southern Line, which was Monroe to New Buffalo. The Central Line would intersect with the Detroit and Pontiac line in Detroit. The Southern Line would connect with the Erie and Kalamazoo line. The government of Michigan under Governor Stephen T. Mason would fund this project of the 3 new lines with about a $5 million loan. The government and governor had a plan to essentially build these 3 lines in a 5-year period, but they were going to pay for this railroad by opening portions of it. So as they built it, they're going to say, all right, we've got a portion of this railroad right here. Let's run it. Let's have it operating. We're going to take the revenue from this operation and we're going to pay off the loan. But their plan didn't exactly work because they overspent. They spent about $4 million out of the $5 million of the railway, and they only constructed 187.9 miles of the projected 600 miles. So they were over budget and they didn't produce enough. And really, by 1846, the state government decided to sell off these railways. They just couldn't afford to pay back the loan. They weren't making enough revenue off of what was constructed. So this project really kind of fell through on extreme optimism. I mean, it was extreme optimism. These companies. So there were these companies that bought the two railways, and the government essentially said to these two companies, you have to finish construction all the way to Lake Michigan. If you buy these things, if you buy these lines from us, you have to, the term is you have to finish all the way to Lake Michigan, because they knew that the transportation of goods back and forth throughout the state, you had to connect Michigan, the lake, to connect with the boat transportation. So these companies agreed, but on the horizon, they really rushed the terms of their agreement, and they said, yeah, we'll do it. But they realized that the real jewel was getting a rail line to Chicago, because Chicago had the Chicago River, and the Chicago River connected to the Mississippi, and that was really the crown jewel of transporting goods from north to south. That could really bring in some great commerce from Chicago down the Mississippi. So I mean, there was really a race between these two rail lines, 2 out of the 3. The northern line was kept by the government. The central and southern lines were the lines that were sold off to private companies. So it was a race between these two lines, and really the southern line was the first to reach Chicago, obviously, because if you go north to south, the southern section is closer probably to proximity horizontally to Chicago. So the southern line got there first in 1852, and then I think like around 3 months later, the central line had another railway that connected to Chicago. So definitely kind of cool. The history behind Michigan railroads, very much powered by economics, and very much rushed, and an overwhelming amount of optimism with some risk and some resurgence, I guess you can say, and the funding of private companies. So something kind of cool in that. So let's dive right in. We're going to zoom in, kind of explore and examine this railroad map of Michigan. Hopefully you can't hear. We have planes, trains, and automobiles all over the place here in Boston. Below us, we've got tons of traffic. So hopefully this microphone's helping out. So we can see these rail lines. Let's see if okay, remember we talked about the southern line? This is the southern line right here. We talked about this line. This line really connected to Chicago. Let's follow this bad boy. See here? I'm pretty sure this is the Michigan Southern Railroad. And boom. This got to Chicago. Right here. Let's see. Let's find I want to see which one is the central line. Do we have a central line? See, we got the southern line. This is Grand River Railroad. There's an amazing amount of railroads all over the place, even numbered stops. You can see that. This is the northern line, is my guess. They don't really call it the northern line, but obviously we went to the northern part of the state. This is Canadian Railroad. So my guess is the northern line really distributed goods. Maybe it's over here. It's not labeled on this map. The northern line is not labeled, unfortunately. We've got individual names. This is the Marquette Railroad line. But we can see how it's connecting to locations on Lake Michigan. And even if you look to Lake Michigan, look at the proximity. It's telling you the distance between this stop to Milwaukee is 84 miles or various locations. So I'm sure industries who were transporting goods by railway were like, okay, if we go to Grand Haven, it's going to be 84 miles by boat. It's going to cost us this much, and they calculated all this out. A lot of industries probably use this map to calculate their transportation costs. Here's St. Joseph. We talked about a St. Joseph line. didn't we? I'm trying to remember. I'm looking at my list of information. Yeah, this is the central line. Okay, yeah. Okay, this is, yeah. So it says Chicago and Michigan right here. This is the central line. Remember we talked about, yeah, St. Joseph to Detroit. Yeah, Detroit to St. Joseph. Okay. Here's Detroit. So this must have been the central line. Let's see if we can follow it. Is this the St. Joseph line? Here's Detroit right here. Yeah, central. Oh my God, I found it. Wow. It's just clustered. There's so much information. Here's the Michigan Central Railroad. So we found this. It connects right here, and if we follow it right through here is Kalamazoo. We talked about the intersection of Kalamazoo. Yeah. And Pontiac. So St. Joseph. So my guess is this is the central line. It came over here and then it hugged the coast. Remember we talked about the central line also went into Chicago about 3 months after the southern line. So the southern line got there first. Here's the southern line. And it went around this way. And then the central line, a little bit hugging the coast of the Lake Michigan. It got there 3 months later. So kind of cool. The central line, if you look at the proximity between the central line and the southern line, I mean, right? They're smack. Here's central. I wonder if that's the central line. If that's saying central line. The southern line is really close to the central line when it gets to the bottom of Lake Michigan. But they have a greater distance, it seems, when you expand out. Still, I mean, here's probably the central line. This is probably here's the southern line. So it's really not that far apart. It's not a big difference of real estate, of land between the two. The northern lines, in this cluster, it's somewhere up here. It's got the government. We talked about the companies essentially buying out the two lines. I mean, these were probably the two lines, probably the most profitable ones up for sale. The northern line, there probably wasn't a lot of demand to buy it, just because it's a really long route and there's not a lot of major cities in that area. Maybe Saginaw, but certainly there's more economic interest probably right here in these two lines, the southern and central. So definitely a cool map that we have here. I'm just, the information on this thing is incredible. It's incredible. We've got Green Bay. Even Green Bay's got a nice railway right here. Incredible. I love these labeled distance between ports. It's just, you can see how important it was to see, transportation lines going across the lake. Obviously, this is a very important factor. If we look at the other lakes, I mean, Lake Huron, there's just there's nothing here. There's nothing showing the distance between land. Even over in Lake Erie, there's nothing over here. You can see the importance of Lake Michigan, as we said before, in the construction of these railways. Lake Michigan was really important that those railroads got there. We can see Grand Haven really was a major port going over to Milwaukee. So I hope you've learned something from this video, and I hope it's been very educational. And check out our other videos. We do a couple other Michigan map videos. We've got maps. We've got videos on maps, historical battles, history in general. If you like that sort of thing, definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're gonna try to be consistent and upload all the time. We're trying our best. But just definitely check us out. I mean, our channel is growing. every single day. Our views are I think we're doing about 1,000 views a day. I don't know how many minutes. Our channel watch time is increased incredibly, and I'm just so happy that people are enjoying these videos. So leave a comment below, like this video, share this video, and I will see you guys soon. Okay, take care. All right, bye.